12 midnight is late. To everyone who just joined, hi, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know your background in design. And if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat. So yeah, Mark, I think we can start whenever you're ready. But just to enter the organization, for everyone listening in, I see a lot of new names. Develop is a community and student-run nonprofit that primarily works in accelerating technology and experiences for social good. So right now, we're especially interested in working towards initiatives and ventures that teach more creators, technologists, and designers to work on projects that are oriented towards humanity. Develop started not just because there's a general gap in CS education or CS careers in the Philippines, but also because we noticed that the industry and the ecosystem at large has a lot of issues with diversity and representation and actually building things for the Filipino masses. So, kind of recognizing those gaps and ensuring that we nurture a generation of creators that are more intentional and mindful in their practice as a designer, as designers and creators, either in their studies or in their practice and career-wise, is key to our work today. Um, but super excited to see people listening from all over the world. And I'm particularly excited to be inviting Mark to talk about this decolonizing design in so many perspectives. And if you follow Mark on Twitter, you'll know that he's very chatty about the topic and is like very strongly opinionated, which we honestly need in the Philippines. Members of the Ethical Design Club will know this, but then there's not a lot of, I feel like there's not enough design discourse in general, or that's just something that Develop has observed. It seems like a lot of like design discussion, especially in like student design groups, is like in what practices can we borrow from the US? What can we bring here? Just like mirroring whatever is happening in the very Eurocentric design world, when we really should be looking at these practices and questioning them and reforming them, because what works in the United States, what works for giant tech companies will not work for Filipino designers. And understanding that, questioning our design education, figuring out how we can be better in practice and in theory, are questions that we're looking forward to addressing today. So let me just read up on Mark's bio in case you're not familiar with him. But Mark Lacsamana is a UX designer and design researcher from Manila. He is currently the head of design at Grocery, and Mark previously led design for iOS and Android at OLX.ph, welcoming over 20 million users a month. He was also previously a designer at Upload and PH, Caliber, and Mint. Mark is also the founder of High Five, a resource website for HIV advocacy, and an active designer for health stigma and HIV. And in general, I'm just really happy to be hosting another queer Filipino designer. Um, and we need to uplift more of designers of these backgrounds and identities. And if you guys have any questions or want to follow Mark, we'll be sharing his Twitter and his profile, so you can feel free to connect with him there. And I'm sure he'll be talking more about ways you can reach him. So yeah, Mark, feel free to start.
So let me just share my screen. And hi, guys. Again, first of all, nice to it's really like
Okay, we will wait for a bit as you reconnect. Love Philippine internet. But in the meantime, um, we'll be reading out more of your introductions. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to just DM me the question or just drop it in the chat. And um, also, I mentioned our design group and the like. Feel free to join us at Develop or at the Develop Discord. So we'll probably be continuing the discussion and sharing materials and the event slides there. So while we wait for Mark to recon, feel free to join our Discord. Um, like we're studying multimedia arts in the Philippines, exploring social design and visual communication for research in interest in making information more accessible. Nikki, who's part of the Ethical Design Club, is a psych student and web designer. Um, Nikki has been learning about the concept of decolonization through develops Ethical Design Club with us. Also, his laptop reset, so don't worry, it's not a Wi-Fi problem. It's a laptop problem. That's significantly better. Be back soon. Ali is a MMA student and still learning to make sense of the design world. Lara is a Filipino Japanese in the Philippines, a media student by day and freelance social media SMM. I'm gonna assume that's social media manager or marketer or something like that. I'm not sure. So free to correct me. I'm a content creator at night. Yeah. Very excited to see people and their backgrounds. And Mark actually tweeted at me to tell me that his laptop reset. So follow him. Yeah. While we wait for Mark's laptop to come alive again, if anyone has any questions or just like thoughts that they want answered or specific topics that you'd like to see, feel free to suggest it in the chat. Um, I'm also especially curious to know about the design students here and your thoughts on like your design education in general and things like that.
I'm so sorry, guys. Like my laptop reset on me. I think it's because like I've left it open for more than a month now.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Uh, can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's begin. Okay. So thank you again for this opportunity. I'm kind of miss speaking, even though like I've mostly been speaking from my bedroom. But yeah, it's a pandemic. That's what happened with Miss Rona. But I guess just to begin with, let me start you off with a short story. Um, in 2011, so you guys know kind of how old I am now. In 2011, I was a fresh graduate, so this was a February morning. February, yeah, February in 2011. Um, uh, I guess global warming wasn't at its peak yet because it was a pretty cold February morning, and I was a fresh graduate, well, about to graduate, and I was already visiting all these different companies trying to apply for a job. Um, I was waiting at this basically convenience store inside this huge mall for one of my first interviews with this giant telco company that no longer exists. Um, and I was waiting there at around 6:37 a.m. Just having coffee and eating some pastries when I noticed this girl come in this convenience store. There were this was back in 2011. Um, this convenience store specifically had stalls like this where you could pay for around 25 pesos or 50 pesos. I don't know if any of you remember these at all, or if you guys are too young to remember these. But they used to have these stalls where you could pay 25 pesos and you would probably be able to surf the net for maybe 20-30 minutes or so, 15-30 minutes. Just enough time for you to check your email, send a message through Yahoo Messenger. Yes, Yahoo Messenger. Or Chica, if you guys I remember what Chica was. Yeah, to be able to tell them like your friends that you're on the way, you're stopping over, etc. So a guy walked in, paid for 30 minutes or so, used one of these machines, and then with around probably 10 minutes left on the clock or so, left. This child from the street walks into this convenience store, um, and she talks to the cashier, and she asks for cardboard boxes. Um, either to sell or to most likely to sleep on, to be honest. While she was waiting, she looked at those monitors and stalls. She didn't know what to do with them, but she was amazed at what the guy before her was doing. And she didn't know what to do, but it was still there, it was still open. So she placed her hand on the mouse and just tried to emulate the actions the guy did right before her. Of course, she didn't know what she was doing, but she was just so amazed and so curious at this whole new world of Windows 98 on this glowing display. And that triggered something in me, at least way back in 2011. Little did I know that this kind of set the tone of like why I would work in tech or what I wanted to do with tech. But at the same time, I found this photo again around a decade later, late last year. Um, and back then, when I first took this photo, I remember all I wanted to do with my naive Athenian brain was I wanted to make sure that every little child like her would know how to use the internet and to use a computer like this. Now, 10 years after, I see so much more in this photo and so much more problematic things with this photo. Besides the fact that I probably took one of the first few problematic poverty porn photos online. Please don't cancel me for this. But yeah, I see so much more to this photo than I ever did before. So, brief intro about me. Um, Before I actually explain what I see now, I guess it's time for you guys to at least know more about me. So, a few things about me. I work in the tech industry. So I currently am the head of design at Grocery, which is a startup that works with sari stores and mostly what we call the informal market of sari stores, carinderias, etc. So as such, I am basically privy to a lot of things that a lot of people don't get to see until for at least 2 or 3 more years. Like I know certain tech trends or have certain access to technology that people don't necessarily understand right away. I am cisgendered male. So I may be gay, but I am cisgendered male. And I don't have a problem. I present male all the time, even if I am probably slightly more feminine than most. But I wear pants. Uh, Whenever I go out, I don't need to be cautious about people looking up my skirt or things like that. I have a college degree, which number one in the Philippines already makes it so much easier than probably 60 to 70% of the of most other applicants out there. It's easier for, and I want to say it's easy, but it's easier for me to get a job. What's even more than that, my degree comes from a top university. I've mentioned I did graduate from Ateneo. Um, One of the things that I actually try to hide as much as I can, you hear it now because my accent, but whenever I'm not in these spaces, I actually refuse to speak in English because my accent just comes out. You'll notice it, especially for the Ateneo, for the guys who come from Ateneo. You'll notice it whenever you say Google. That's the telltale sign that you're from Ateneo. But yeah, coming from Ateneo, um, you're automatically like placed on top of a pile for a lot of jobs. And even if there's a lot of things that people say badly about Ateneo, you still get you're still privy to a lot more information in the world of UX for one than a lot of other colleges do. Uh, to be able to go to Ateneo, of course, my family had money. I accept the fact that I do come from money. My family basically owns sugar plantations in Negros Occidental. So yes, I sit on the bloodstains of probably like sugar farmers in Bacolod. So what does this all mean? It means that I have privilege, and I understand that I have privilege. What is privilege? Is Let's define this right now. It is a special right or advantage or immunity granted or available only to a particular group or a particular person. So it is an advantage. It means that I basically have a leg up on a lot of other people. I understand that. But again, that's not the entirety of who I am. I understand that I have privilege, but that's not the end all and be all of who I am. Besides having all these advantages, I'm Southeast Asian. So if you are coming from another country or you are speaking from a more global audience, um, besides the fact that itself are already have a certain stereotype, I'm particularly Southeast Asian. As Ali Wong, one of my favorite comedians, once mentioned, there's what you call cool Asians, like Koreans, Japanese, who give you J-pop, K-pop, and fashion, and then there's jungle Asians who give you disease. It's a, yeah. So in that case, like we normally aren't thought of when it comes to like the tech industry, because when people think Asians in tech, what people automatically think of are East Asians, people like me who are not yellow skinned but more brown skinned, and in my case I'm actually like even warm toned skin because I'm part Spanish. We're not necessarily thought of right away when it comes to in this industry. I live with a chronic illness, so I have HIV. It's something that I've come to terms with, and it's not. I'm particularly not ashamed of it anymore. Like it's nothing. It doesn't scare me as much anymore. I'm more protected because I know I can say it. But that just makes it a little bit harder for me to apply for certain jobs. It means that I can never work in Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia or China or Saudi Arabia or India or Australia. Where else? Basically, pick a country, and unless it's a socialist country in Europe, I probably would have a hard time. I am an atheist, which means coming from this very religious, almost Catholic majority country, nobody ever thinks about how I feel about ritual. Nobody thinks about if I would want to actually join something that is normally forced upon, like praying before meals or praying at the start of the day or praying for anything, because it's not something that I want to do. And I'm not the only one like this. What's worse, for some people, I'm probably the spawn of Satan, actually. Um, I am proudly homosexual. I am gay as fuck. And I am proud to say that. But that just means in this majority Catholic country, I am mostly always gonna, like, my boyfriend will always just be my boyfriend. I am gender non-conforming. So I've mentioned I am slightly more effeminate than most people. In fact, I am actually a drag queen. Well, during a time where there were still drag bars, but I used to dress up in drag, and I love it, and I miss it. I am Miss Euthanasia. Um, yeah, and it's something that I actually miss. So, what do these all have to make? Basically, I have things that make me more privileged or more advantageous, and I have things that basically marginalize me, other me, or give me a disadvantage. These things can exist together in one person. These are the intersections of my identity. This is what we call intersectionality. Nobody is just purely privileged or purely marginalized, but at the same time, we have to take a look at what the complete wholes of people's identity to actually see where things intersect. This is the meaning of intersectionality, in a sense that yes, I may be gay, I may have a chronic illness, but there are certain things that make it easier for me to live my life as an openly gay man with HIV because I have money and I have a college degree, versus, like, let's say, an openly gay child or man in the provinces who has no other choice either to stay in the closet or work as a beautician. I just have more choices than anyone. So these things kind of like make it easier for me. So another part about this is not every privilege is made the same and not every marginalization is made the same. certain things make it easier for you and certain things make it harder for you. And these are things that we have to understand the nuance of. And to better illustrate this, we've been in this season of Miss Rona for almost a year now. And we have to understand how the intersections and the identities we have don't affect us in the same way, even if we all work in the same industry or even if we all work in design. For example, my previous boss, who's Romanian, he lived at the outskirts of his town, and he's able to climb out into the forest or the mountains, even in the toughest lockdowns, because he could afford it. He was There was nobody out, nobody beside him, nobody to crowd his family, so he could afford to just go out and take a stroll. However, for other people in big cities in Europe and in New York, their only chance of being able to see other people or commune or even walk out of their basically jail cells of rooms and etc. would be their windows and their balconies, which is even which is I guess sort of okay, especially if you take a look at like this how I started lockdown in the Philippines, where I had to move back in with my parents um, in this bedroom where I grew up in and spent my high school and college in. So yes, I am what they call this, a bed frameless millennial. Do note that this was it's gotten a lot better. I do have another bed now, and it's gotten a lot cleaner. So another example, a lot of us who work in tech probably enjoy the fact that we're working from home, that we're able to work from home with the joy of our pets to help us with our mental health and keep us at least sane while working from home. But of course, not everyone has the joy of having a great home to actually work in. For some people, like me, when I first moved back home, I didn't have pets, I had pests. I actually caught around 10 rats. I probably deserve a PSN trophy now. And I'm just waiting for the next boss in this JRPG of a pandemic because I probably deserved it. I've caught more than 10 rats now, which serious, that's actually a picture of the rat, by the way. And I should be thankful that that's all I had to contend with, because some people actually had to eat rats in this pandemic. Um, so you might be wondering, what is this? What is this left-leaning social justice crap, and why is it important to design? Well, I'm here to tell you, like, yes, it is important. It is part of design, Brenda. Um, this is because the things that I mentioned that give us an advantage, privilege, can lead to assumptions about the people we design for. Things like, sure, they have internet, sure, they would love to work from home, sure, they have a space to work from home. They don't they just need, like, I don't know, extra time or whatever. It just leads to assumptions about like the people we work with and the people we work for. And these are harmful assumptions, especially for the people we design for. For example, a lot of people in the West think about Asia and designing for Asia, and they automatically think about um, neon lights and signs from Hong Kong, Japan, steel buildings from Beijing, or high tech, super fast internet from South Korea. And they think that Asia is this magical high tech place, that it's all the same, that automatically it's just this whole other world where they speak a completely different language and everything is magic. Like when they speak, it's probably some incantation and you'll turn into a frog or whatever. And it relates to something that, and this is something that actually is very particular to an idea that was originally at least coined by this communications idea from this guy named Edward W. Said. This was something that was actually explained to me during college, called Orientalism, where whenever the West looks at the East or Asia, they think about the things that they see, and they automatically generalize Asia as this one homogeneous place where it's magical, esoteric, and completely different, and everything is so mystical and the same. Where you look at snake charmers, geishas, etc., and they're all the same. But we all know it's not the reality of things. Where Korea is very different from, let's say, Indonesia, or East Timor is very different from Indonesia to begin with. Sorry. So let's start with a quick poll. Chia, I guess to illustrate how people think of Asia and how people assume about things in Asia. A lot of you are Filipinos, so some of you may already know this, but let's do a quick poll. Number one, what are the official languages of the Philippines? And number two, how many local languages does the Philippines have? And let's cut it at that and poll. So a lot of you mentioned that the official languages of the Philippines are English and Filipino. I will get to that. And many of you mentioned there are 320 languages as well. I will get to that. Number one, the official languages of the Philippines are English and Filipino, but we have to think about how that works in a decolonization lens. What is Filipino? If you look at it from most people who work in linguistics, Filipino is just another form of Tagalog, to be honest. Because even though or the main idea around Filipino was it loans words from every single Filipino language, it is mostly taken from a Manila-centric Tagalog, and this becomes a problem, especially when you think about, like, let's say when foreigners come in and they automatically think to design for the Philippines, you need to actually design in Filipino. But here's the problem. In terms of volume, with some 58 million speakers, English is now more prevalent than any other language in the Philippines. Tagalog, in contrast, is used by only about 27 million Filipinos. So if you think about designing in Filipino, let's say if you are designing for fintech and designing for the financially underserved, if you design in Filipino, you are mostly going to be designing for this area of probably already financially overserved Philippines in the Manila. 90% of everyone who speaks Tagalog or some kind of Filipino speaks it in the Imperial Manila region, while the rest of the Philippines speaks some other form of Filipino language. One thing that actually ties these all together is probably English in all sense. In fact, the mere fact that most of our education system is handled in English, from science to math, it already makes sense if you want to actually create something. Again, if you end up designing just for that Imperial Manila region, and there's something we have to think about decolonization as well, or colonization, where a dominant area pushes its influence to its periphery. That's also colonization, because you end up marginalizing them. You end up leaving them in the periphery. You end up leaving them not thought about or insignificant. That is what it means to be marginalized, especially in the world of tech today. Another thing, something that everyone's probably familiar with, whenever somebody talks about internet penetration in the Philippines, we like to say that 70.7 of percent of the population of the Philippines use the internet or is connected to the internet. It is estimated that we would be 77.1% at some point in time, and this based on the statistics, internet penetration statistics. So you would think going with internet only solutions is probably very easy, or at least would solve a lot of your problems. But what if you're at that 30.3% who need particular services, the particular services that you use and work through, especially when these are important services like education or banking? You would end up climbing a mountain just to send a class requirement, or this really broke my heart at the start of the pandemic. For the thousands of Filipino students who are only able to use computers their from the equipment that is given to them by the schools, they don't have access to that now, and many of them have had to actually beg for a laptop during the start of the pandemic to be able to continue to work or to actually to go to study. And something we don't think about, what about our elderly, who many of them have never thought about or never prioritized technology, and who have children who probably don't see them anymore and have no other way to communicate to their children but the internet now, yet they don't have access to technology. They end up working like I don't know if any of you saw this, but this was an image of an old senior citizen who basically was given special access to technology and the internet by these people at the Power Max Center to be able to call her children. She now has a laptop, by the way, like the internet rallied behind her. But yeah, like imagine just having to do that every time you need to call your children. So where does this leave them? Where does it leave us? What about us? And this is where we need to understand why privilege is something we need to talk about in terms of decolonization, because privilege impacts empathy. The more privileged you are, the harder it is for you to see what the problems are for other people, because you end up having blind sides that you don't see. Example, because so many the way we design our streets in Manila, only 10% of Manila of people who live in Manila actually own cars. 10 to 20%. 80% of the rest of Manila actually use a commute to work or use some sort of active transport. So when the pandemic started and we turned off in all of our public transport, where does this leave our healthcare workers who have no cars? You would be surprised at how much a doctor earns in our private and our public hospitals. You think the private hospitals pay more? No, they don't. Most of them earn probably between 20 to 30,000 a month. That's not enough for you to be able to buy a car right away. This is why it became super hard, and we've actually moved nurses. A lot of nurses have moved to using active transport, but still, we still continue to build roads that only benefit the top 20% in the city, which leaves other people who, again, with no public transport, how do we get patients who need to go to their chemotherapy, or day-to-day laborers who have no cars, yet they're forced to go at the edge, and we say that those people are actually create traffic. Really now? And here's the thing, as designers, we like to talk about a lot about empathy, and we say that we are in the business of empathy. But the reality is, most of our talk on empathy is bullshit. And this is something that one of my friends, Vivian Castillo, has mentioned. Most of our talk about empathy is bullshit, because when we say empathy, what we really mean is sympathy. Because we are coming at it from a place where we think we know better, that we are actually better than them. That is not empathy. Because what true empathy is to be able to feel what another person is feeling, to understand what they go through. And the reality is, you will never understand what another person is going through. My experiences as a heterosexual, as a cisgender homosexual man is very different from a transgender woman or a transgender man walking down the street. I will never know what it feels like to be judged by what I wear, or be told to go back home and get a sandwich. I will never understand how it feels like to be afraid to leave the house and get raped. Well, maybe I do, but that is not my reality. I will never understand how it feels like to wonder where I'm going to get food for the next day for my family because I can rely on something. I cannot completely empathize with that. And that is the reality we need to face. We cannot empathize with everything because, again, what we teach is mostly sympathy, not empathy. And just to clarify even further what this is, how can you empathize with something that you have no idea about? A good example, I used to go to this UX conference every single year in Asia. And it was about this UX conference about designing for Asians. And whenever I go to that, they would talk about designing for Asia or this new world in Asia. Yet, this is what their panels look like. Talk about designing for Asia when every single one of your speakers is white. Where are the Asians? Right? Where are the Asians for a UX conference in Asia? Or referencing something that happened in the States, when Black Lives Matter happened, so many designers thought of this as some way for them to get some brownie points. And sure, you may have had great intention to spread the message of Black Lives Matter, but for some people they actually wanted to cash in on this, sell t-shirts for this. Sure, it may have gotten some intent of actually spreading the message, but Black Lives Matter is not for you. Even if you're Asian, you are an overrepresented minority in technology. This is not for you. The most you could have done is to actually amplify probably the design and graphic design work of other Black designers in technology who rarely get a voice in this industry. What's happening? Okay. Back up. Sorry. What's happening? There we go. And speaking of Black Lives Matter, we tend to try to we tend to think that Black Lives Matter is something that is specific to the U.S. That racism is something that is very particular to the U.S. And the idea of decolonization is very particular to the U.S. I have some news for you. For the Philippines, we may not see racism or actually experience racism in the same way as Black people do, but there is racism in the Philippines. There is anti-Blackness in the Philippines, and there is colorism in the Philippines. Let me tell you the story of Dinah. Dinah is a child of the Ati tribe in Zambales Clark area. My friend Lester, a first bike ride, went up there for a weekend ride, and he met Dinah, and she was super curious about the bikes that they were bringing in, and her eyes gleamed just trying to see and wanted. She always wanted to have one, but of course she didn't. And here's the thing: the people of the Ati tribe are probably one of the oldest indigenous people in the Philippines. They are the original settlers of this land, in particular areas like Zambales, Clark, where we constantly pave over roads and create high-tech cities. And they're the original settlers of places like Boracay, where we constantly advertise tourism so that white folk can benefit from our white sand beaches, and then push them away to small little areas in the mountains. Not only that, but because of our inherent anti-blackness as Asians, many of the Ati people with their characteristic dark skin and curly hair rarely get to finish school or go to college or get a better life outside of their little villages. Where is the justice or mobility for them? And this is just emphasize even more about the privilege we have versus other people, other Filipinos in our current country. That when we design something, that when we create technology, that when we design or innovate technology, does this include them? We like to think that we may be more monoracial. We are not. We do have problems in the Philippines. We are not absolved from decolonization, especially if you come from Imperial Manila. Just saying, we were able to raise funds for this, and Dinah now has her bike, so it actually helped her and a couple of her friends have some mobility to be able to go to school, or at least be able to go to the market and help their families out. Uh, Sorry, this was probably deleted somewhere. So how do we truly design for the marginalized? Something I probably deleted it when we went off. If we can't empathize completely, how do we design for the marginalized? And that's probably something everyone's probably asking, because we can never truly empathize with everyone, and it's something that we can never truly actually 100% do. So how do we design for the truly marginalized, especially because we like to say about all this shit about empathy. And I used to think that this was the answer, and I used to be so strong about this, but still up to now I still do not know if this is truly the answer. But I think it's the closest thing that we can do. Maybe it's time we replace empathy and we replace it with trust. Trust these marginalized people to be part of your teams, because you can't empathize. You will always have a blind side. Maybe it's time to start bringing them into your teams. Look for the queer person to actually put them into your team so you can design something more inclusive of their ideas. Look for the PWD, the blind person, the person who comes from the barrio, the person who comes um, uh, from uh, poor universities, maybe, or at the very least, when we go and actually interview or research for these marginalized communities, maybe it's time we actually trust their experiences or ask them what would they do, and maybe we can design with them. Maybe it's time to trust them to tell us their experiences, to be part of our projects. Uh, because we need to what we need to do, to be honest, as designers with a certain amount of privilege, because let's face it, you want to work in tech and you're working in tech, you have privilege. You are privy to a lot of things that many people in this country will never get to see. But we need to stop that messianic idea that whether you're a designer, a developer, white, educated, male, or straight, are the only ones who can solve these problems. Because a lot of times, maybe these people in those marginalized communities can solve their own problems, and they just need a little help from you to help actually give them what they need. They don't need you to solve their problems for them. They just need you to help give them guidance. Because remember the last time somebody felt messianic about a group of people? The last time somebody felt messianic about a group of people, we sent Ifugao children to become part of human zoos in the US. We sent Aita children to become part of human zoos in the US. This happened because certain people felt that they were better and that they could actually give people a better life. So they put these people as not people inside cages to be gawked at. To tie it all together, tech, here's an idea. If you guys still feel like Silicon Valley may be like the best thing in the world for tech, heads up. 7,000 miles from Silicon Valley and downtown Manila, a secret team of content moderators have a target of 25,000 Google and Twitter posts to delete each day. This is the Twitter and Facebook content moderation team, and they are set up in Manila. They see the worst and the worst of the world. They see cats being killed, chicks being smashed on. These are the people who make sure that you don't see graphic content. They suffer, their mental health suffers so that you can feel good about whatever you see online. And if we think we're designing for people, aren't they people too? If we design our processes, aren't they part of the process? Is this ethical? So maybe it's time we stop designing for people, and maybe it's time we started designing with people. Unless, of course, the only people who you think are people are the ones who look and think like you. Thank you. And thank you. And I'm done speaking. Cool.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. And thank you also for the lovely intro that recognized, I guess, both the privileges that you bear and also the parts of your identity that you feel need to be just like stated, represent you. Yeah. I I really appreciate it. I know the audience did as well. And we have a bunch of questions on the Polev that people have submitted in anonymously. And just a
Oh,
reminder, for others who want to ask any questions, you can do so in the chat, or you can ask us to unmute you. Then you can ask it yourself. But right now, maybe we can read some questions that people have sent in and sending in the link again.
uh,
Maybe we can start with the top question right now on the Polev. So, Mark, someone is asking, what are direct actions we can do to decolonize design, and what are things you have done to decolonize design?
so a big thing I think that helps, to be honest, is to actually have those difficult conversations, especially because in the Philippines, we have to be honest about this, where we don't have a lot of tech leadership right now that are local, that come from the Philippines. When you reach the very top levels, you are often faced with a lot of expats. And you need to have those tough conversations with them to make them realize that you are not, that what they see is very different from what you see every day. And you have to have that tough conversation, to be honest. And it's not easy, to be honest, especially with me and my friends like to joke about it. We get the worst expats in the world in the Philippines, to be honest. But it's all about having that tough conversation where you try to teach you don't necessarily say teach, but you just have to mention with them from your experiences alone. Even if you come from a place of privilege, you have to kind of relate it to whatever marginalization you have and try to explain it from that point of view. And slowly, it actually makes a difference. A good example, when I was working for Uploan, one of my friends who is a British American, she was working on how to improve financial uh, financial wealth for Filipinos. And she came up with so many articles about how Filipinos live day to day or month to month, paycheck to paycheck, because they think of automatically of buying a new phone, etc., etc. Na it's the whole uh, isang kayod, isang tuka idea because we like to show off. But I had to emphasize that that is one view of it, and you have to dig deep about why that happens. Why do people want to show off a new phone? It's because there is the environment that makes them want to do that, because they push so much, because we want to make sure that when we come home to our parents we look good. And it's usually less about buying stuff for ourselves, but making sure our families feel good, even if it ends up putting us in debt. Right, we end up buying so many things for our folks. So that's an example where I had to bring it up and actually have that tough conversation with that, where this is fairly, it's coming from an outsider point of view that may not understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I feel like a lot of, well, we all know that a lot of fintech companies in the Philippines are run by expats and foreigners, unfortunately. And well, they're aware of like very surface level issues, right? Like Filipinos are under ban, blah blah blah. But they only see the surface and aren't aware of the cultural norms. And it's really something that you won't be able to understand unless you're Filipino. So that's a really great example of that. The next highly rated question is kind of controversial. Well,
Hmm.
mainly because of the name drop, but someone is asking, or someone has stated that most designers tend to come from the same schools, Ateneo or DLSU, namely. Now
Yeah.
that you're a senior designer, Mark, and have worked with many juniors from these schools, what must they unlearn? And what are the biggest issues you notice of designers from these schools? And I just want to say that Develop is, yeah, we're a Philippine organization, but we're mainly students from Metro Manila, and we're also mainly students from the school. So,
I mean, that's the thing. We have to realize that. So I been working for 11 years. And yes, these schools have really great designers, and that's because they have great access to the internet and to all this data. They have financial capability to go to conferences abroad and to learn all this. That's the thing. When you that's the thing. Like yes, things like UX Soc from Ateneo, LaSalle, where yeah, there's UX Soc in Ateneo, LaSalle, etc. They're great because they actually improve UX education across, and it's great that they're doing that. But we have to understand that the only reason probably some of these students or some of these graduates know about UX or are good at UX is because they've had early access to it. Because again, they have the capability of to actually learn from it because they have UX Soc or they have other things like it. We have to give, like, now that I am in design leadership and actually am a hiring manager, I have to take that lens into perspective where are if I'm choosing between two um, two applicants, are they good because they come from this school, or are they good are they good just because they come from this school and they have access to it, or are they good regardless of they come from the school or not? And in my case, I've actually particularly already mentioned to our HR to prioritize people not from these four schools. And yes, that sounds slightly biased, but the thing is, in my case, even if I don't hire from these schools, these kids will probably get jobs. That's a reality. That's equity for you. If even if I don't hire from these schools or I put them at the bottom of the pile, somebody else will hire them. That's not going to be a problem. Um, in my case, also if you're asking what kids from these schools have to realize is number one, they are not probably just um, you have to realize again what I mentioned. You probably understand UX as young as you are now because you've had access to it, because you've had financial capability to access it. Somebody from, let's say, Letran may not know or understand UX right away or have knowledge about UX right away because they just didn't have access to it. And this is where having that helping hand to just give them a chance is super helpful. You just have to give other schools a chance, and sometimes they learn just as well. To be honest,
yeah, thank you for that. And I especially appreciate the fact that you make in your position now as a hiring manager the attempt to look at students from other schools because unless you are the one who paves the way for these students to get even a chance to get the resume or portfolio reviewed in the first place, they might never get that,
yep,
and
they
that's
probably
super
will never get
important.
a portfolio if I don't. So that's the thing. It just takes what an extra 30 minutes a day to help teach. That's nothing.
That's a really nice perspective. I hope more hiring managers in design across the country realize that. The next question is, I think someone probably follows your Twitter because I know you just tweeted about this a few hours ago. Someone wrote, "I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Disney's Raya and the Last Dragon movie, and how a Southeast Asian princess might further ill-informed notions of Southeast Asia being one homogeneous jungle Asian glob."
Oh, funny part is like I have not finished Raya, so I had to stop. I had to stop at the last 30 minutes because my friend was waiting for me to have brunch. I mean, it is funny because she's hearing like the dragon there, and it's Aquafina. It's like jarring. But so here's the thing about Raya. Number one, we don't have Disney Plus in the Philippines, so I had to have like some VPN to actually access it. And the thing about Raya is it's a little bit better than most other Asian representation that Disney has ever done, because at least it's closer to home. It's closer to our roots of Southeast Asia. But the thing is, we have to realize that the Philippines is so diverse, guys. It is super diverse. There's no one version of a Filipino or a traditional Filipino garb or indigenous Filipino. We have very shiny garb that are often come from like the Muslim sultanates in the south. We have a little bit more almost native, almost it feels a little bit more closer to like Native Americans from the north, which is the Ifogaos. We have people who are closer to like let's say the Aboriginals from Australia, somewhere in the middle. So that's something we need to recognize where Raya is a very particular part of Southeast Asia, and that's the very Indochina part of Southeast Asia. And that does exist in the Philippines, mostly in the Visayan regions, but that is not everything.
Thank you. I haven't watched Raya, so I don't know what to say to transition from
There is
that.
a good part about Raya because it does talk about like five tribes, and they're all very different. So I think you can take a look at it at that point because the five tribes in Raya are very different. So that's also another thing.
So it's still worth a watch, you'd say.
It's a good watch. She does our Nis. That's pretty cool, to be honest. So that one's pretty cool.
Nice. So the next question, how do you influence design practices and leadership in startups or companies to consider the why of design instead of just the how? Any
Ah,
tips on how to convince senior leadership, especially?
so the parts where I've gotten the most or the best parang success at is I invite them to a workshop. To be honest, like it sounds so easy, and the reality is it's a lot easier than you think. Just invite them to work on a workshop with you, and it is amazing how things change when they actually work with their hands, even in this time where everything is being worked on front of our screens. But inviting them to work with their hands in let's say on a workshop, like creating like a double diamond process or an ideation process, a crazy eights, etc. Or even working on something more, something I tend to do is the problem definition diagram from Canva, which is the whole what is the problem, why is this a problem, etc. And making them work with their hands with everyone else, it really helps push people to focus on the why. And that's the thing. If you just need to package it in a different way, and that's what workshops do a lot. And I've learned to enjoy. I used to hate doing workshops. It's not my thing, but it's one thing like learning to facilitate workshops. You end up seeing like how like the little glow in people's eyes when they learn. Oh wait, it feels so good to step back and understand the why. Learn facilitation workshop facilitation skills. It is amazing when you actually work with like leadership on that, because yep, they end up focusing on the why more than the how.
Thank you. The next question is pretty broad. So what do you think a decolonized Philippine design looks like? What do you think decolonized Philippine design looks like?
A decolonized Philippine design. hmm, a decolonized Philippine design would probably look, well, a little less minimalist centric. That is like in that sense where we may, number one, sure, I talked about how it may be easier to use English, but if we end up creating and acknowledging that we have 200 languages and we can design for that, that is amazing. Because I mean, Canada does it with Quebec, to be honest. So like having signs in all those languages, at least specific to those areas, would be really great. A decolonized Philippines would be something that where we don't necessarily have to always look for representation in Hollywood and ask or have our dads ask, Pinoy ba yan? whenever they see a brown-skinned Asian, because we don't necessarily need to have that representation anymore, because we know we are comfortable with ourselves. A decolonized Philippine design would be something where Filipino designers are in leadership and are in C-level leadership, not necessarily, and are not passed over for some expats. That is probably like a good Philippine decolonized Philippine tech design area.
Yeah, I really feel that. And I feel that in general, the industry places so much value on like Western signals. Like, if you look at Philippine startup articles, it always praises either a Filipino who is foreign educated or an
Mm.
expat taking their Harvard Business School, whatever learnings here,
Yep,
while not necessarily knowing the issues of the country, which is really frustrating.
yep. I mean, I have nieces and nephews who went to Columbia and Fordham, so they have a fast track to life compared to I do. But hey, that's it. That's how it works, and that's something that we want to change and should be able to change.
That's true. I am also in that. And it's really unfair, like how easy it feels now compared to when I was trying to hustle in high school.
Yeah.
It's really unjust, and I really hope it changes. So, someone asked if you have any general recommendations on Filipino designers and tech leaders that you follow who are also working to decolonize design, and I guess share your views.
Okay. It is gonna be weird because some of the Filipinos I know who work around the decolonization and diversity inclusion space do not come from the Philippines or are what you call third culture kids. But they recognize that, so they're pretty great. One of my favorite people who talks about this is Jay DiMattilio. Jay DiMattilio is the lead. Is one of the lead designers in Grab in Singapore. He grew up in Brooklyn when Brooklyn was cheap. When was Brooklyn cheap? I wonder. But like when Brooklyn apparently used to be cheap to live in the 90s, I guess. Yes, Jason DeMattilio. He is the lead designer for Grab. Love the guy. He is very also opinionated about these things. The reason why he moved back to Singapore was he wanted that blue ocean. And yeah, he talks a lot about culture and designing and understanding culture because designing in Southeast Asia is very different, and you only understand this well if you are Asian. Another guy who I super love and super amazing is Paolo Malabuyo. Paolo Malabuyo. He was born in the Philippines, but his family immigrated to the U.S. when he was 6. His claim to fame is he was a VP in Netflix, and he is now the VP for Google Ads in YouTube. Yeah, YouTube ads, and he talks a lot about the bamboo ceiling of tech. That's an actual term for that, the bamboo ceiling for tech, and we have. He also recognizes how he was lucky, actually, about what he's done, where he is. So, two great guys. Other people who I find are really great at this. I will always recommend my UX mom, si Angela Obayas, Tuban. And she talks a lot more about like being a minority as a woman in technology because she's a mom, and she is super great at this. Um, but yeah, it's also that whole problem of like being a Filipino and a woman in this global sphere of tech. Really great. Love Angela. Who else do I know is great at this? Mm, I think those are the top people who at the top of my head right now. Huh? At the top of my head. There's probably a couple more, but I can't remember everyone. But people who are not Filipino, again, I mentioned Tatiana Mac. Tatiana Mac is super nice and super great. She is amazing. She talks a lot about privilege and socioeconomics in technology and accessibility. Love her. She really wakes you up, actually. And Gina Ann, who are so Tatiana Mac is Vietnamese American, and Gina Ann is Korean American. So yeah, perfect. You got your cool Asian and you got your jungle Asian, right there. So so those are my like top 5 people to talk to. Amazing people.
So Gina Ann, is she the one from Asana?
Yes, now she's from Asana. Oh my god, like it just feels weird because I still remember that she was at Salesforce.
Just making
Yeah.
sure I got all the links right.
Yep.
So for the 5 names that Mark mentioned, they're in the chat, and I'll share them in the description right after. Thank you, Mark. So audience member has a question. So Maggie, I'll unmute you. Feel free to intro yourself before you ask.
Okay, hi Mark. Could you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Maggie.
Okay, hi. So I'm Maggie. I'm currently a multimedia arts student who's focused on, or actually rather I'm curious palang on designing in the margins. I was super happy that I got to attend your talk because I literally saw the notice before after I woke up. Lol. So I actually have this question and okay, let me pull it up. So I'm interested on your hot take on mandatory outreach projects, especially the ones done by private schools. Being from Ateneo, I'm sure you know about stuff like this. And
Yes.
if you, yeah, so and I've been in a South school for like the longest time ever. So mandatory outreach projects are my life.
Yes.
I actually think it's a pretty good exercise to the quote unquote design in the margins, but I don't know. I feel like instead it seems like something treated otherwise, and it even sort of develops apathy or messiah complex, like
It
both
does.
extreme ends in students. How do you? What's your take on that? And if it's something negative, like how do you think? How might we change it as
Okay.
students, if ever you have any advice?
Sobrang
Thank you.
funny. Sobrang funny na to, by the way. Because like Ateneo is famous for this, by the way. Like they send their students to actually work in different areas. So like in second year, I became a bagger at SM Supermarket. So at your service, yes. Memoryado ko pa. um, or like sikat dito actually yung mga Atenista na nagbebenta ng mais or ng fishball sa UP. Um, check it. By the some interesting hot takes on this. You can listen to Juan Miguel Severo's podcast, ang Walang Kwentang podcast, and I think it was the first episode where he talks about this super guwapong guy na nakita niya at nagbebenta ng uh, fishball at nagulat siya na ang konyo ng tunog kasi sinabi sa kanya 10 or 20, 20. So yeah. um, but like hot take on it. Number one, I do think it is important that people from Ateneo, LaSalle, etc., experience what it's like in these margins and to understand what it is to like work in these grueling conditions. But at the same time, I don't think there's enough debriefing for students. And I don't think there's enough briefing and debriefing for students who do these. Kasi they come in, they come out. And it is often done in such an outsider lens and they're so protected while they're doing it. I will say you are super protected while you're doing it. If by the way, some side story, if you guys know Sam Lorraine Chan, I was batchmates with her. So she is also a service UX designer, and we actually were baggers together. um, but yeah, it's super one shot, and it's super. It's not. There's not enough debriefing about it. Talaga. They don't. It would be better if you experience it longer, if there is more debriefing or like talking about it, and the people who talk about who kind of like moderate these conversations are also not well trained to push this a little further kasi. So I think it's important we continue doing it, but we need better kind of debriefing around it. um kasi nga, you end up super safe and people end up changing their behaviors than around us, to be honest. What it does do, I will say though, every time nagkakaroon ng ganyang klaseng outreach sa UP or like in the corn vendors sa Katipunan, tumataas yung sales nila, so it does help them. But yeah, it just needs better debriefing. I will say that it's important because the Ateneo I went to in high school and in college is very different to the Ateneo now. It's gotten a lot more exclusive. It's gotten a lot more highbrow. So we need these things to actually push people into those uncomfortable positions. So yun, I think it's super important, but it needs better debriefing.
Yeah, Maggie says, thank you, Mark. Happy to know it's something that disrupts everyone's feelings because that's how we know it's something that should be looked at. Let's go, people who went to LaSalle or Ateneo.
Yeah. And besides that, by the way, a third year Ateneo, you're actually supposed to do immersion, like you live with the family over the weekend, and I think that one is a little harder and harsher because you are less protected in those areas. I think that one needs even more debriefing because sige, you live there for a weekend, but it's just one weekend. They give you the best of the best while you're there. I will admit though, and this is hypocritical, I did not go to my immersion. I wrote page. I wrote 7 papers instead because I got sick. Because I got sick. But yeah.
Nice save. Um, so there's another question. Well, there's a lot of questions. So the next upvoted one was in a country where young designers are conditioned to get a job and dish out case studies as fast as possible, how do we make room for a culture that cares about decoloniality? I don't know how to pronounce.
Sorry. I
Wait,
didn't understand the question.
like, let me paste it in the chat. In a country where young designers are conditioned to get a job and dish out case studies as fast as possible, how do we make room for a culture that cares about
Uh,
decolonizing design?
huh. So that's also a thing that I tend to talk or at least have strong opinions about. Uh, we try to push young designers too hard to create a brand for themselves. Um, when personally, and I say this with a lot of experience talaga on it. Um, for a lot of young designers, because we push so much of that hustle culture and like push, 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 get your brand out there, push, do everything just to get yourselves out, hustle, hustle, hustle. It is mentally exhausting, and I've been there. It to the point na you will come to a point where you ask yourself, "Who am I outside of this space? Who am I outside of this?" So if you ask me, that's the deeper question here is we need to be a little bit nicer and to ourselves and to young designers about exploring what they want and who they are, because I'm sorry, even as you graduate, I graduated at 21, I still didn't know what completely everything I wanted to be at 21. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a designer, but where, like, that is a big thing in itself, diba? We need to stop pushing young designers to hustle so hard and to be nicer to themselves, because you have to realize that you are not a brand. And I say that in very harshly. You are a person, not a brand. And you have to understand yourself in that. Number two, make room for decoloniality. That's part of it. Like, take some time to learn who you are, what you like doing, who you are outside of work, because it's work, so that you can be an individual. You can be unique in your own way and how you want, and you can be authentic and you want to be, so that when you go into those interviews, you can be authentically be who you are. Especially if these workplaces do preach about diversity and inclusion, you need to be able to be authentically who you are as well. So yeah, number one, we need to stop like pushing for that set a brand, etc. Learn about yourself. Take your time. Nobody gets it right away. To be authentically who you are. If this is what you want to do, that is your own way to decolonize things. That's only one way to decolonize, because you are being authentically who you are. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And just like anecdotally, I noticed like in the Philippines, every designer I know centers design as their identity. Like in the Philippines, we friend our employers and colleagues like on Facebook, and that's not really common in other countries. And designers always have like a kind of distinction between their personal life and their work life. But
It's
then
hard.
designers in the Philippines will like post their case studies on their Facebook feed and stuff like that.
It becomes everything about you, and it's hard because I swear I had this depressive moment siguro at the tail end of my 20s, asking myself, who am I outside of this space? Because like at the end of the day, when I come home from work, what else do I do? Diba? And that's buti na lang like this pandemic happened, and like that's how I got into drag. That's how I got into cycling, because like I found something else of who I was. And that is my way of decolonizing design too, because I am taking up space of who I am in those spaces.
That's such a good way to word it. Decolonizing design is also taking up your space for your authentic self and not just
Yeah.
being the queer self. But yeah, has a I'm sorry if I didn't say your name right. They're asking what should we do if we cannot safely showcase our authentic self, especially in the workplace? I guess this especially applies to people who are queer or who have
Yeah.
like protected identities and can't really be out.
I empathize with you guys. Ang pangit ng term na yun when I just said. But I empathize with you guys because I understand it can be hard. So vulnerability moment. I understand how that feels because when I was in OLX, that I felt that where I could not be my authentic queer self because tech is such a masculine industry. I understand how this feels, especially if you're queer. Tech is such a masculine industry, and you feel the weight of toxic masculinity talaga. If you are not the same, it's for a lot of people in the Philippines, they understand being gay as either you're this, like femme, etc., or completely masked gay. But what if you're not and you're in between? And people don't not necessarily understand it. And I lived in that in between, talaga, and it's hard. Um, I will say this is the part where you kind of you need to protect yourself. Number one, you need to protect yourself. Be careful, and this is where number one I always found that I think the thing that helped me at least was finding my own circle of allies. So even if I needed, as RuPaul said, we're all born naked. Naked, the rest is drag. Even if I had to put up a face of drag to get into work every day, there are spaces in those bigger spaces that I can be a little bit more authentic. Finding those network of allies in, let's say, in your office or in school, where you can be authentically who you are, even if you don't know who you are yet, and you're trying to figure out, and you're authentically just trying to figure out yourself. Super important. In my case, I found that, and I was lucky enough that my one of my he's not my direct boss, but the two bosses above me, Bit Santos, was like that for me. He was the first person I told that I was HIV positive to. And it was super helpful because he was able to shield me from everything. And that helps, like having at least that one network of people, and even those small places, try to find that because at least even at for like 24 hours a day, if you can have 3 minutes that you can exhale, it's super thankful and it's super useful. Even at least until you can find bigger and bigger spaces to exhale. I call it that, like it's that you can exhale. And then you just work your way to improve and grow that network until later on it becomes a little bit safer for everyone. And that's how I did it as well. So I found that small people that I can exhale to at OLX, at least a few people that I can exhale to. And that slowly grew until finally we did um, what they call this a pride event in the office, and that grew from there. Unfortunately, I left OLX after that, but yeah, um, that's how I did. You find small little allies, and it's super important. Like be on the lookout for those small little allies. It's super helpful.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I'm hoping that all folks here have the opportunity to find those allies in the spaces around them. I know it might be a privilege and it's easier in some areas, but it's so important. Hannah has question on the same topic that she shared in chat. Do you think having a work self separate from your personal self is something that needs to be retained in the Philippines? I find that a lot of us are motivated by personal connections, and this might be something that can be reconsidered under the context of a workspace in the Philippines.
I okay. I might be a little bit old school on this one. Some notes on this. A lot of companies will say um, what they call this work-life harmony or work-life. Yeah, they would say something work-life harmony instead of work-life balance. I think that's bullshit. Work-life harmony just means take the work home with you. um, so, but yeah, having like a work self versus an outside of work self, it depends on you. It really depends on you. In my cases, like um, I do have a work self in a sense because I am in leadership. I can't always be like everything to like let's say the people under me. You can ask Jiggy, etc. about this. Where there are yes, I am like a den mother sometimes, but I also have to. But outside of that, like they see me at clubs, it's very different, and I do make that delineation actually. I guess it's important, but in my case, because it's not too different. Like I think the difference there is, um, it just makes it easier for me to understand that there are certain places for certain places, or there are certain times for certain things, and that's how I feel about it. Um, but again, it doesn't mean that you can't make personal connections regardless. So a good example is I tend to bring some of my work friends to my queer safe spaces. Like when, oh my God, pre-coronavirus, when Today X Future was still alive, I would bring some of them to Future and they would see a different side of me. And that's completely okay because again, that is part of who I am and that is like a human connection we can make. But I tell them this is very different from who I am when I come into the office. And sometimes we make jokes pa nga na parang work from home ako bukas alam mo na kung bakit. Done. And yeah, it just makes it's more of like you learn how to make human connections regardless of where you are because the thing is who you are in the office is still an authentic self and who you are outside of the office is still an authentic self. It's just like different parts of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the last point you made is really great because people feel like well, I think a lot of young people feel like any sense of professionalism is like fake when you can totally be professional and still be yourself. It really depends on how you, I don't know, how you treat yourself and how you
So
manage relationships in the office. Yeah.
okay, a good example of this, by the way, and I consider this being professional, and people would consider this being professional. People know in the office that I that they can notice that I am getting more stressed at the end of the day, and I joke about this, but I actually do this. The more every moment of stress that I had in the office when I was in Caliber, I would add a layer of makeup. Like it would normally like be just like if I felt pretty bad and I was stressed, I would add concealer because it made me feel like I was chill. So it creates like that whole yes, I am good, professional, and that's still being professional. Who cares if I wear makeup and it's just concealer, right? The worst thing that would happen is if I added um, what they call this eyebrows. They know that something's happening, but that's I think it's only happened once, but that's still okay. I think I draw the line at adding eyebrows, but that's yeah. But still, that's being professional because I at least I'm being presentable in that sense. But it's also being authentic because I love makeup and I'm queer.
Thank you. So now we know if Mark does his kilai, he's suffering.
Yeah.
So we'll take note of it. Um, Someone asked, I know we're almost out of time. Do you want to end at 3:30 Mark? And
Sure.
go for one last question?
I'm pretty free this Saturday, so go lang.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, we have so many questions. And if anyone else wants to ask, feel free to just message the chat or use Polev. But I think there's a question limit because we're on the free plan. So just DM me if you're shy and if we run out of space. Someone is asking, Can you point out common features you've noticed in tech and user experience design that might work for the West, but not for our local Philippine audience?
Ha, okay. Uh, try ko isipin. Ha! Okay. So, um, there are parts about, number one, um, this is partially a weirdness of the Philippines, ha, where when we talk or ask about dates and when we talk and ask about measurements, and so I'm very good friends with she. She's actually neighbors. She's like right there. She's an heiress, and she jokes about how Americans and their ways of measurement. And the weird part about this is if you have British people asking in centimeters about like any personal weight, the reality is we don't normally measure ourselves in centimeters, in metrics. So you have to kind of like figure that out. Like whenever you're asking for heights, weights, etc., it suddenly becomes imperial. So that's very particular to like European centrism versus like the Philippines versus like everything else in Asia, because everything else in Asia is completely metric, by the way. Another part, dates. It is fairly common for the Philippines to use the date format of um, month, day, year, and that is the same as in the US, I think. But in Europe, it is usually month, day, year. In the Europe, it's usually day, month, year. Another part as well, uh, thinking about, so a lot of people tend to think about like number one, if you're designing for advertising, in the Philippines, you always need an endorser. That is kind of like a rule of advertising. You can't get away without an endorser. So you kind of need that is one rule. I used to work in advertising. That's something I've noticed. Like the US and the West can't get away without an endorser sometimes. A lot of times we can't. So those are like pretty interesting things that are very different from designing from the West and designing here. Uh, I can't think of something on the top of my head, but besides that, yun actually, um, yeah. I think yun. Those are big things at the top of my head. But yeah, yes, she and I are neighbors. That's why she was the one who taught me how to ride bikes. So yeah.
I love she. That makes sense. Now a lot of things are clearer because you guys are like all in like one design group that I
Yeah.
noticed. So I was like, how are you guys like riding together so often? That's why, but that makes sense now. Another question, similar also on designing for local. Do you have any guidelines while you work, especially in regards to being careful with representing Filipino culture through design? For
Oh,
example, appropriating indigenous tribe textile emblements, etc.
oh, that that just makes me realize another thing. Um, so there is this one example, by the way, that Google did, and this is probably very advanced design, but you can Google Photos auto tags photos based on like AI. The more melanin you have, it might actually end up hurting that algorithm actually, and that is something that like designers in those spaces and working in those spaces need to be careful about, because our melanin does not show up, it shows up very differently towards like white people. Example of this, Google Photos during its first run auto tagged black people as gorillas, and that is, yeah, pretty like racist as it is. um so on that, then like guidelines around this, especially around indigenous people. So yin, number one, I am fairly very careful about representing what is Filipino. um as I grew older, again, number one, my full name is Mark Lester Coscoluela Lacsamana. So I am a product of colonials, to be honest, intermarrying. Um, and something that I've learned to kind of like unlearn is the idea of Hispanic Filipina or Hispanic Filipiniana, where thinking that what is Filipino is the Hispanic Filipino, or what is traditional Filipino is Hispanic Filipino. And I've just learned to become more aware of like whenever I talk about what is Filipino, I learn to talk about pre-colonialism and something that is not Hispanic Filipino, something that is not Barong Tagalog or Maria Clara, something that is a little bit more, let's say, um, either Sultanate Philippines or Ifugao Philippines. Um, so, and it's actually very similar to, like, let's say, number one, never when you when you try to like use these things, like let's say Ifugao costume, etc., you use them with the utmost respect to that, to those identities, where you want to highlight them and not profit from them in that sense. Another example of this is when I showcase food. I love food. I That's the one thing I miss, is being able to dine out as much as I can. When we talk about Filipino food and showcasing Filipino food in our designs, we need to realize that Filipino food isn't necessarily just your tapsilog, kare-kare, nilaga, sinigang, and lechon. There are dozens of types of Filipino food, from Maranao food, which is amazing, by the way. If you've ever had Maranao food, learn to, I always find like learn to present those as well as Filipino. Maranao food is very interesting because it's closer to like the things that I like about spice. It's closer to like Indonesian or Malaysian food. So Maranao food, and it's halal, by the way. So that's an interesting difference about it. They're pinik pinikpikan, tama ba? I don't know. I'm probably mispronouncing it in Baguio. It's another type of Filipino food that people don't necessarily showcase. So when I'm designing something around food, I learned to like just not show your barbecue or your halo-halo, etc. That everything around it is also Filipino, and we talk about this and we showcase this. Yun.
Thanks for that, Mark. And I feel being more intentional about, I guess, the diversity of local cultural objects that we showcase is important. And also just like moving beyond design, that's just like
Mm.
jeepney painting and red, blue, and yellow are
Yeah,
things that we have to balance.
like, even that, like red, blue, and yellow. Number one, if you know the origin of the red, blue, and yellow of the Philippine flag, like yes, red, blue, and yellow has their meanings in the Philippine flag, but that was actually taken as well from what we understand flags to be, which are at that point our only understanding of flags were Spain and the U.S. That's why our Philippine flag colors is very close to the U.S. flag, actually. So you have to be curious then about the way you emphasize Filipino-ness and Filipino colors.
Right. And I mean the fact that our country's name is Spanish
Philip.
name. So see the questions and recognize which ones we haven't asked yet. So there's another question on, I guess, design more broadly in career-wise, I guess. Do you think most designers in the Philippines are just trained to do agency work instead of change design on a larger scale?
um, I see this is definitely very different now versus when I started. Um, I will say like it's gotten better in the past 3 or 4 years, where there are more product people. I say this like product people in the Philippines, where they're designing product. The thing though is the Philippines has come mostly from a service oriented sphere. So even when they're designing product, the approach they do is very service oriented or agency style. So it's still something that you need to kind of educate out from, but it's gotten better. There are a lot more product-oriented people in the Philippines. Here is my hot take on it. Because whenever you're working in product, you kind of need a good, strong product manager or PM, and there aren't a lot of good product managers in the Philippines, unfortunately. And most of the time, most product managers in the Philippines that people hire are actually account managers, not product managers. So you as a designer kind of like have to come in as well. Not naman like over teach them, like say you're better than them, but guide them that we're not selling to a client. We are creating a product. Yun. I mean, again, there are great PMs, but you have to like bring out the greatness from them because they're coming from an account management space in their heads.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, honestly. And actually, um, I'm working at Kumu, and very few for PMs come from PM backgrounds who didn't study management. A lot of them actually studied like design or data in college. So it shows that there's a lack of maturity, I guess, in the field.
I think we also need to talk about like in college and in universities, at least when I was in college, whenever somebody who is in design, like when I was in Ateneo, like BFA ID was 4 years in existence. And they tend to only show that the only path or career in design is the agency life. And it isn't, diba? So that's where we need to step in to actually show that there's more around this. That's also part of it.
Yeah. And like I just want to bring up that in the ethical design group that developed Deluxe, we talked about that a lot, just like the state of like design education in the Philippines and how like I know some schools they really just like pump out work and make their students do as many projects as possible in like so many different disciplines without like any room for them to really consider the why behind their designs, which is really disappointing. And it feels like education hasn't caught up with the need for more product and strategic oriented design, which is a
Yeah.
huge shame. But hopefully, we can reform the way that design education looks
It
in the
is slightly
Philippines.
changing now. I mean, I have friends who are now professors who are my batchmates. Like, for those who are in B4ID, like I was batchmates with Tata Yap. So she's back now. If you find her in your, if you have a chance to take her up as your professor, Tata is amazing. She will make you understand why. To be honest, she will try to ask you how to understand why. Yeah, love Tata. Like Cookie. Like I can actually do an impersonation of her. Like, yeah. So go there.
I feel like there's so many Ateneans in our group and in
It's
the chat.
changing. Like Ateneo is pretty privileged in that sense that you have people that are changing it. Another good example of like a good prof in Ateneo that you can get that will make you ask why. Jan Belmonte. Like Jan's pretty good at this. Then like he's rejected a couple of people of thesis works before because they weren't asking the why.
Yeah, I see Jan on like Filipino design Twitter. Very outspoken figure.
Hmm.
Do you think in general, maturity of design in the Philippines is good enough for big companies to level up their investment when it comes to design?
That's the thing. I do think we like the maturity is there. So I was having brunch now with a good friend of mine, si Julia Buhay, and also really she's more in the biz dev PM space, um, and we talked about a good quote that my old boss Paul Rivera said. The Philippines has world class talent and world class maturity and talent that's stuck behind third world environment and third world policies. And true enough, we do have like mature talent here. It's just that we're stuck behind third world systems and policies that kind of hinder us. I mean, like we have Dan Matutina, for God's sake, and he's amazing. We have people working in WordPress who are in the Philippines. Like Sarah Kada, if she is working in WordPress. We oh my God, like, ingit pa rin ako kay Justin Win because she got to Shopify before I did. But we were good friends. It's okay. Like, see, like, we have mature talent. It's just that we need to push our systems and our policies to become as mature as we are.
That's a good question. And thinking systems thinking and also thinking about policy and regulation on a larger scale are also questions that we talk about a lot in the org. Because obviously we can work on ourselves as much as we can and want, but then unless we push the barrier and boundaries for everyone, no one's gonna break it.
Yeah.
So I think we're approaching 3:45 and 2:45 a.m. for me. So I think we can end here. Mark, do you have any, I guess, last pieces of advice or words for the designers and devs and students in the developed community in general?
I guess my biggest thing is like always question there's nothing wrong with always questioning yourself. Because I mean, it's okay to feel not to not feel like you don't know everything, because that's the point of it. That's the point of design. You don't know everything. So that's where you try to learn from other people.
Thank you, Mark. Where can people connect with you if they want to find more of your work or ask you questions?
So I have not updated this with a couple of works from last year, but my website is marklacsamana.com. It is pretty bad because I'm pretty lazy. It is a Notion page that I put on the web. So it is, but yeah, you don't need to code, even though I do know how to code. Pero that works like a Notion page as a portfolio. Um, if you want to see me rant, twitter.com/mk, EMKEY. Yeah, that's mostly where I revolve around actually right now. I do have a Facebook page then. It's just that I've been fairly quiet recently because I'm fairly busy in this past couple of months because a new job and all. Oh, I am on Clubhouse if you guys want to find me there. Pero it's not, I don't know, medyo na-awkward din pa ako ng konti sa Clubhouse. Medyo weird pa siya sa akin. I guess I just haven't figured it out yet. But same deal. You can just look for my name there.
We should do a design room with the other designers who speak on decolonizing design. I think the design rooms on Clubhouse so far are pretty Eurocentric. We can change that, I believe.
Yeah, no. It's great if you can find your space, and there are people that let you find your space. Like Marissa from Designers Guild helps out. Yun, she's great. Look for her. Pero yun, medyo weird lang. It's nakakahiya. Yun sabihin ko, like to just raise your hand in Clubhouse, but it helps.
If any students here need a Clubhouse invite, feel free to message me. I have a lot. So you can get on the platform also. It's iOS only lang, but I think they're releasing Android soon. But Mark, thank you so much. I'll share your links with the students and your students here. Feel free to just join Develop's Discord and Facebook group if you want to ask any more questions or continue discussing design. I think Mark's also around sometimes, but better to ping him directly. Thank you again for making time for us this Saturday and for joining Develop in our talk series on technology and humanity. It was really nice to hear your perspectives and insights and just like raw and authentic experiences. I feel like we trash talked Ateneo. We talked about the future of what design could look like. I'm pretty optimistic about the state of Philippine design with both senior designers like you and with students who are listening in and who are just like questioning systems as early as in college because it's sometimes something that people realize a bit too late and really never too early to question authority and value yourself and your own ideas and to really think about the systems we have at scale.
Yep. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll share the recordings and all the links afterwards. But yeah, have a good Saturday, everyone.
Bye.